Holly Holm, once a blazing star whose name reverberated through packed arenas, now stands in the fading glory of her career at 43 years old.
Something that's been on my heart, and I feel like if I have the platform to say it, I need to say it. I just feel it's really sad, all this sexual...
The woman who once turned the combat sports world upside down with a single breathtaking kick is no longer chasing championship belts or roaring crowds. Instead, she searches for something far more elusive: purpose. The fans who once shouted her name in adoration now watch in quiet sorrow as the relentless march of age, the sting of defeat, and the toll of a punishing career cast long, unyielding shadows over her legacy. What became of the fighter who etched her name into history with one unforgettable moment? Why are even the UFC's top brass now gently urging her to step away from the sport that defined her? This is not merely a story of fights lost in the octagon. It is a heart-rending tale of what happens when the spotlight dims, when the body begins to falter, when the phone stops ringing with offers, and when the world gradually forgets the legend you once were. For Holm, there is still a fight to be fought, but it is not the one she spent decades training for in sweat-soaked gyms. When your entire identity has been forged in the crucible of victory, how do you navigate a life that seems to hand you nothing but setbacks? Born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Holly Holm grew up as the daughter of a preacher, her life anchored in the quiet simplicity of small-town values. Her childhood was shaped by Sunday sermons, family dinners, and a humble existence that seemed destined to lead anywhere but the global stage of combat sports. Yet, beneath her unassuming exterior burned a restless fire, a deep-seated need to test herself, to push beyond the ordinary. As a young girl, she dabbled in gymnastics, sprinted across soccer fields, and dove into pools. But none of these pursuits captured her soul. It was not until she was 16, when she stepped into a local kickboxing gym, that her true path began to take shape. Under the watchful eye of Mike Winklejohn, a former kickboxing champion turned coach, Holm's potential became undeniable. He saw in her a rare combination of gifts: lightning-fast speed, impeccable coordination, and an almost stubborn willingness to absorb punishment and keep moving forward. More than that, she possessed a discipline that could not be taught, a work ethic that set her apart. While her peers spent their teenage years chasing fleeting pleasures, Holm was in the gym before sunrise, perfecting her jab, refining her footwork, and building the foundation of a career that would make her a legend. In her early 20s, Holm made a bold decision that would alter the course of her life. She turned professional in boxing. What followed was a meteoric rise. She tore through opponents, stacking up victories and claiming world titles in 3 different weight classes. Her technical precision, relentless conditioning, and ability to outsmart her rivals earned her comparisons to boxing's greatest, with some calling her the female Floyd Mayweather. She was named Ring Magazine's Female Fighter of the Year twice, and promoters hailed her as the best female boxer on the planet. But behind the accolades, the reality was far less glamorous. Women's boxing, even at its peak, offered little in the way of fame or fortune. Holm's paychecks were modest, and the spotlight rarely lingered on her achievements. After nearly 40 professional fights and little left to prove in the ring, she made a choice that stunned her supporters and baffled the sports world. At the height of her boxing dominance, she walked away from the sport that had made her a champion and stepped into the unforgiving cage of mixed martial arts, a world far more brutal and unpredictable. In 2011, at nearly 30 years old, Holm's transition to MMA raised eyebrows across the combat sports community. She had no background in wrestling or jiu-jitsu, no experience in the grappling arts that define modern MMA. Most fighters enter the sport in their early 20s, with years to develop a well-rounded skill set. Holm, a veteran of one discipline, was starting from scratch in another. Yet, what she lacked in experience, she made up for with an almost obsessive dedication. Her work ethic was the stuff of legend. At Jackson Wink MMA, a gym renowned for producing champions like John Jones and Georges St. Pierre, Holm threw herself into training with a ferocity that left her coaches in awe. She did not just hit pads. She drilled takedown defenses for hours, sparred with some of the toughest fighters in the sport, and transformed herself from a boxer into a complete martial artist. Her early MMA fights were a revelation. She tore through regional opponents with devastating knockouts, precise head kicks, and combinations that seemed pulled from the future. The UFC took notice, signing her in 2015. But her early wins in the promotion were steady rather than spectacular. 2 decision victories did little to silence the skeptics who wondered if she was just a boxer pretending to be a fighter. Then came the call that would change her life forever. In late 2015, the UFC was scrambling to find a challenger for Ronda Rousey, their undefeated bantamweight champion and global superstar. Rousey was more than a fighter. She was a cultural phenomenon, gracing magazine covers, starring in movies, and dismantling opponents in seconds. Many fighters ducked the chance to face her, intimidated by her aura. Holm, however, did not hesitate. The fight was set for UFC 193 in Melbourne, Australia, in front of 56,000 fans. Holm entered as a massive underdog, with betting odds stacked against her and analysts predicting a first-round finish. But in her corner, there was no fear, only focus. Holm and her team had spent months dissecting Rousey's every move, studying film, crafting a game plan, and drilling it until it was second nature. When the bell rang, Holm executed that plan with surgical precision. She outmaneuvered Rousey, leaving the champion frustrated and exposed. In the second round, a clean left head kick landed with devastating force, sending Rousey crashing to the canvas. The arena erupted, the world stood still, and Holm went from underdog to immortal in a single moment. That kick became one of the greatest upsets in sports history. But that pinnacle of triumph also marked the beginning of a slow, painful descent. Just 4 months later, Holm stepped into the octagon to defend her title against Miesha Tate, a seasoned wrestler with a relentless drive. Holm controlled much of the fight, keeping Tate at bay with sharp strikes and thwarting takedown attempts. But in the 5th round, a moment of miscalculation changed everything. Tate locked in a rear-naked choke, and Holm, refusing to submit, went unconscious. The title was gone in an instant. The narrative shifted overnight. Doubts crept in. Was the Rousey win a one-off? Was Holm's moment of glory a fluke? The media, once her cheerleaders, began picking apart her flaws. The losses mounted. Valentina Shevchenko, a master striker, outclassed her in a decision. Germaine de Randamie edged her out for a featherweight title. Holm's record slid into a 3-fight losing streak, and the weight of those defeats was visible in her eyes. In interviews, her voice carried a quiet pain. "I'm not here to be average," she said. "Right now, I'm not doing anything special." A highlight reel head kick knockout over Beta Korea briefly rekindled hope, but the victories were fleeting. Losses to Chris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes followed. The latter, a brutal echo of Holm's own defining moment. Nunes knocked her out with a head kick, a symbolic passing of the torch that left Holm's reputation battered. Outside the cage, her personal life began to fracture. In 2019, after 7 years of marriage, Holm filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The stability she had once leaned on, her faith, her family, her husband, began to slip away. Yet, even as her world unraveled, Holm kept fighting. It was not just a career, it was her lifeline, her identity, her reason to keep going. Most fighters would have retired after such a string of setbacks. But Holm's resolve was unshakable. In 2020, at 38, she delivered a masterclass against Irene Aldana, dominating for 5 rounds with the precision and poise of her prime. Critics were stunned. The old Holm was still there, adapting to a new era. But beneath the surface, her body was beginning to betray her. A diagnosis of hydronephrosis, a serious kidney condition, sidelined her. A knee injury followed, a stark reminder of the decades of punishment her body had endured in boxing and MMA. Recovery times stretched longer, and the explosiveness that once defined her was fading. When Holm returned to the octagon in May 2022, it was not to the fanfare of her championship days. She faced Ketlin Vieira in a low-profile main event, fighting with the same calm, calculated style that had made her a star. Many believed she won, but the judges' split decision went against her. Another quiet blow to her legacy. Holm found herself in a cruel limbo, too skilled to be dismissed, yet not dominant enough to reclaim her place at the top. The UFC kept her on their roster, capitalizing on her name recognition. But the matchmaking was merciless. Every opponent was younger, fresher, and hungrier, with no easy fights in sight. Still, she signed a new 6-fight contract, not driven by financial need, but by a deeper compulsion. For Holm, fighting was not just a job, it was the core of who she was. To walk away would be to surrender her sense of self. As the years passed, the conversation around Holm shifted. The media no longer asked if she could return to the top. They wondered if she should retire altogether. Fans who once celebrated her as a pioneer now questioned her persistence. Why was she still fighting? Was she chasing a dream that had slipped out of reach? In July 2023, those questions came to a head when Holm faced Mayra Bueno Silva, a young, confident fighter on a finishing streak. Holm entered with her trademark composure, but the fight turned against her. In the second round, Silva caught her in a rare standing ninja choke, an unexpected submission. Holm resisted, but her hand tapped out, a moment that felt like a dagger to her legacy. For fans who remembered her dismantling Rousey, watching her submit to a rising star was agonizing. The fallout was messy. Silva's positive drug test overturned the result to a no contest, but the damage was done. The UFC booked Silva for a title shot, while Holm was left in the shadows, her relevance fading. Social media turned vicious, with fans calling her finished and accusing her of tarnishing her legacy. Even Dana White, who had long championed her, began to speak of her in the past tense, praising her as a legend, but hinting that her story was over. Holm, however, refused to listen. She agreed to face Kayla Harrison, a 2-time Olympic judoka and an undefeated powerhouse, at UFC 300. The matchup felt like a deliberate setup, a coronation for Harrison as the next big thing in women's MMA. Holm, the former champion who had once toppled giants, was cast as the sacrificial veteran. The fight was brutal and brief. Harrison overwhelmed her with size and grappling, dragging her to the ground and unleashing relentless pressure. In the second round, she locked in a rear-naked choke, the same move that had haunted Holm since her loss to Tate. Holm tapped out at 147, and the crowd's applause for Harrison carried a somber undertone. As Holm sat on her stool, bruised and breathless, there was a palpable sense of finality. Dana White's post-fight comments were respectful but pointed. "I'd love to see Holly retire." For many, this loss felt like the closing of a chapter, but Holm was not ready to end her story. In a move that shocked the MMA world, she requested her release from the UFC despite having 2 fights left on her contract. The organization granted it, and for the first time in nearly a decade, Holm was a free agent. There was no drama, no public feud, just a quiet exit from the promotion that had made her a global name. Her team insisted she was not done. "She's healthy. She wants to compete," they said, carefully avoiding the word retirement. Rumors began to swirl. Would she return to boxing, where she had once ruled? Could she sign with a smaller MMA promotion like Bellator or PFL? Some even speculated about bare-knuckle fighting, a brutal arena where aging fighters sometimes seek a final stage. But beneath the speculation, a deeper truth was unfolding. Holm was not chasing titles or revenge. She was chasing identity, the one constant in a life defined by combat. For nearly 25 years, fighting had been the rhythm of Holm's existence. Every decision, her relationships, her daily routine, her sacrifices, revolved around training camps, weight cuts, and fight nights. Without that structure, what remained? The silence that follows a career of cheers is a void few fighters are prepared to face. Holm had become so accustomed to the grind of battle that she had forgotten how to live without it. Her greatest moment, that 2015 head kick against Ronda Rousey, remains the defining image of her career. It overshadows her 33 boxing wins, her titles across 3 weight classes, her induction into the Boxing Hall of Fame. Every highlight reel begins with that kick. Every article circles back to that night. Her opponents, from Tate to Shevchenko to Nunes, saw her not as a current threat, but as the woman who once toppled a giant. Living in the shadow of that one perfect moment is a unique kind of prison. The sport has evolved, new stars, new techniques, new champions. But Holm's identity remains tethered to a triumph from a decade ago. That kick made her immortal, but it also made it impossible to be anything else. Now, in 2025, Holly Holm stands in the most daunting arena of all: life after the fight. At 43, divorced with no children and no promotional contract, her future is a blank canvas.
Is both liberating and terrifying. The word retirement seems foreign to her, a concept she cannot embrace. She may continue training until the gym doors are locked, take a low-profile fight in a distant country, or quietly fade from the spotlight without a farewell. Her body carries the scars of her journey, years of damage, multiple surgeries, concussions, and chronic pain. There is no pension for fighters, no safety net to cushion the fall, only the fading echoes of crowds that no longer gather. Aging, for a fighter like Holm, is not just a natural process, it is a trauma, a betrayal of the body that once carried her to glory. The tragedy of her story lies not in the knockouts or the losses, but in the relentless giving of herself to a sport that no longer returns her devotion. The world has moved on to the next prospect, the next headliner, the next woman waiting to be cheered until she, too, is forgotten. Yet, Holm holds on, not for belts, not for fame, but for the fight itself. Fighting, in all its pain and chaos, has always made sense to her. It gave her structure, a reason to rise each morning, a way to define herself in a world that demands answers. As long as she laces up her gloves, even if only for a sparring session, she can delay the question that looms over her like a shadow. Who is Holly Holm without the fight? Her story is not just one of loss, but of an unyielding spirit. A woman who gave everything to her craft and now faces the hardest battle of all, finding meaning in the silence that follows.